Hello, can you guys hear me? Okay. Thank you for attending today's panel. My name is Kristy Hamilton, and I'm West Coast editor of IFL Science. The goal of today's session is to hear from those on the front lines of cell and plant-based seafood, and to discuss the challenges and opportunities facing this industry. So without further ado, let's just jump right in and start by having you guys introduce yourselves and your company's mission.
So I'll start. So thank you, Kristy, and thank you, all of you. My name is Cooperhouse. I'm a co-founder, president, and CEO of BlueNalu. Our company seeks to be a leader in this global supply chain solutions for sustainable seafood, providing products that are healthy for people, humane for sea life, and sustainable for our planet. I have a 35-year career in the food industry, and now excited to be part of this evolution that's happening quite quickly in cell-based seafood.
I'm Evan Rapoport. I'm the CEO of Oceankind, and we're a foundation that works on ocean conservation issues, and we try to take an approach of the sort of high risk, high reward, how do we make big new things happen in the ocean conservation space. And I'm here because I love the ocean and I wore the attire that's appropriate for it today to try to represent. And I think I'm here, I think, hopefully for the same reason a lot of us, which is that we love nature. We have grown up as part of nature, and I'm just highly, highly motivated to try to do everything I can to help save our oceans. And if the solutions that people here are working on is part of that, then I'm all on board. So we're as quickly as possible trying to figure out how effective can all of these things be to help our ocean.
My name is David Benzaquen. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Ocean Hugger Foods. We make sustainable plant-based alternatives to endangered species of fish using whole vegetables. We are in the market in US, Canada, and expanding throughout North America and starting into Western Europe, and excited to be here, honored to be on this panel.
I'm Maisie Ganzler with Appétit Management Company. We run cafes for corporations, private colleges, and universities, and specialty venues, including the Chase Center, where the Warriors are going to play, which opens tonight with its first big event. So a big thing happening in San Francisco and in our company. We've got about 1,000 plus cafes in 34 states. And so we buy a lot of meat, we buy a lot of seafood, and we buy an increasing amount of whatever word we're using today to describe the new wave of seafood and meat.
Hi, Sandhya, Sriram here from Shiok Meats. Shiok actually means delicious or fantastic. We are based out of Singapore, and we're a cell-based clean meat company. I'm the CEO and co-founder, and I'm a stem cell scientist by training and education, and right now basically trying to get the product to market as soon as possible in Asia.
Great, thank you. So to begin, I'd like to pose a very broad question, but one that I think is very important. We've heard a lot at this conference about land-based meat, so I'm excited to jump into the waters of the seafood, the plant-based and cell-based seafood. So how do you guys see yourselves fitting into the existing seafood infrastructure, and do you? And also, why do you think now is the ideal time to enter the seafood infrastructure and industry?
I can start. The global seafood demand is at an all-time high, so people really do love seafood. The per capita seafood consumption, quite a bit of data has demonstrated that Asia is leading the planet and will continue to do so in the years ahead. We need a new solution for our supply chain. So fundamentally, we have an issue between wild-caught and farm-raised can't keep up with our global demand. So cell-based and plant-based represent new solutions for providing consumers with the seafood products that they enjoy. So as demand is increasing, supply unfortunately is diminishing. And on top of that, we obviously have increasing concerns about environmental contaminants, microplastics, and mercury and other issues that are challenging our seafood supply. So the time is right to really disrupt this seafood supply chain, but also supplement wild-caught and farm-raised with another solution.
Yeah, I think we've all seen these sort of very dire reports, and some of them were alluded to earlier today. The two in seafood that I continually reference are roughly by 2030, we'll have a 30% increase in the demand for seafood globally, wild catch fisheries has been flat in terms of what is provided for decades, and so all the difference has to come from aquaculture or from these other products that everybody has been working on here. And then the other one, whether it's the right date or not, scares the hell out of me, which is by 2048, we're predicted to have no more sustainable fisheries and essentially a total collapse of all ocean ecosystems. And we could go into the details of that paper another time, but whether it's 2048 or 2058, I don't really want to live in that world. And so I kind of believe that now is the time to get way ahead of this and to try to do everything we can. The solutions being proposed here are not the solution, they're a solution. And I think it's just really important we throw everything we can at this, because there are so many people around the world who rely on oceans to eat, and there are so many wonderful animals, whales, and all the other ones that we find to be tremendously charismatic, and we're stealing their food right now.
I agree wholeheartedly with Lou and Evan. When we look at the issues from ethics to environmental protection to health, it's a crisis. The animals alone, 5 times as many animals, 50 billion from the oceans are killed every year for food in the US, compared to about 10 billion land animals. On health, the amount of microplastics, PCBs, mercury, and other ingredients that we don't want in our bodies in fish is ever increasing and posing a greater danger and threat, especially when you look at the addition of hormones, pesticides, and other things into farmed fish, which is becoming an increasing part of the supply. And then on the environmental side, we don't even know all the problems we're creating. What I can tell you is this: more carbon is stored in the oceans than on land. And nobody is measuring how much of that is being released when we disrupt the food chain. Just like bees are a keystone species that protect us on land, we don't know how many of the species that are going extinct in the oceans are resulting in more algae blooms or more dead zones that can cause coral to die and leach so much into the atmosphere, and what that could do. Nevertheless, the loss of those beautiful animals. So we know this is a crisis. We're proud to be one of many parts of the solution, and are glad to be collaborating with others to do that.
I won't repeat what's already been eloquently said, but just add that there are a lot of parallels between land-based animal agriculture and aquaculture, and the ills in both are pretty parallel. But when we talk about seafood, we have an additional issue, which is species extinction. No one's worried that the cow is going to go extinct, but I am worried that there's a lot of seafood species that are going to go extinct, so we've got that extra worry.
I can definitely speak for Asia. On an average, every Asian consumes about 100 kilograms of seafood per year. Wow. And we hold about 60% of the world's population. So looking at that and speaking for shrimp and crustaceans, I don't want to delve into how disgustingly they are grown, but just imagine sewage water, bleach, and antibiotics. And that's exactly what your shrimps have. So I think that's where we want to disrupt that for sure. And it's too late, but we are trying to push it so that we don't have to be at the point where everybody's eating sewage water.
Yeah. And sort of speaking to those lines of species depletion and also overpopulation, how do you see plant and cell-based seafood playing a role in food security?
So we've been, I'll speak on sort of behalf of the philanthropic work that I'm doing as opposed to sort of investing in companies. We all sort of hope and believe that the products that are being developed right now will have a dramatic improvement on ocean conservation, and it seems to make sense that if you can create a great piece of ahi tuna in a factory, then that will displace the wild catch. Unfortunately, it's not that straightforward in the wild, because there's lots of very strange things that happen with increasing fishing pressure as prices go down, because people still need to take the same dollar amount home. And so you actually end up getting these sort of backward bending supply curves at some point where the people actually catch more if the price goes down, which is totally weird, and the economists that we work with are telling us about this stuff. And so what we're really trying to understand is, what are the species that we should be all prioritizing in order to have the maximum impact on our ocean conservation? And that's not tremendously clear. And so rather than thinking of this all as one big hammer of clean seafood, we're trying to think of it as maybe it's just clean shrimp and a couple other species, maybe it's not all of them. and we just don't know yet. So philanthropically, we're trying to fund a lot of the grants and the research that will actually allow us to learn that, and I would certainly encourage you to follow up with me afterwards if you're interested in that stuff.
And then also, I think this is an interesting question for Sandhya. Do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, like I mentioned, if you're consuming 100 kilograms of seafood per person per year, that's a lot of seafood that you're eating, and you have to make sure that you're eating a good source. But in Asia, where we have a lot more developing countries, people don't know the right questions to ask, or what do they ask, and they don't know where the source is. So based on some of the research that we have done and what we have read that's been done previously is almost 75% of the seafood that's in the supermarkets is misrepresented, mislabeled. Wild caught is labeled as farmed labeled as wild caught, and so on. So I think this is a big, big problem because you are supposed to be as transparent and as open to your consumers so that they come back and buy your products. But if you mislabel them and call them something else, it's truly a problem. And what we've seen is most of the seafood that's not in its farm, like for example, in Asia, in Southeast Asia, almost every dish has shrimp paste in it. You will find minced shrimp in a lot of products. You'll find minced lobster in a lot of products, which is not seen as much in the West. Honestly, those lobsters are not even lobster meats. Those shrimp pastes that are used are actually rotten shrimps and the shells of shrimps. So I think these are the main questions that should be answered and questioned when you're talking about food security in seafood.
And many of us may be wondering why this future food isn't on our plate yet, when we can clone organisms, we can grow brain organoids in a dish. So I'd like to sort of speak to some of the hurdles here in this industry. What stands between your company and the day you're able to deliver products on cost parity with its counterparts?
I can take that. We're only about 12 months old, so we need a little more time to get there, but we're getting there pretty soon, and a little more money, of course, but we'll get there. I think for us, again, like every clean meat company, it is the cost of production. The reason being, you would have heard cell culture media, the scaffolds, the scale-up, the bioreactors, and so on. We're trying to crack the code as much as we can, but we're more than open to collaboration rather than just doing it all on our own. And honestly, I don't think that's going to work out at all. For us, what we want to do and what we are good at is making the meat. We don't want to make the media. We don't want to work on components that can be done by the other industry. So we're working on that, and hopefully we should be on your plates in Singapore by 2021. So I'm actually also working for the Singapore Tourism Board for free. Please do visit when we're on the shelves.
I just want to add to that, this whole category, and David can maybe speak to plant-based, but in the category of cell-based seafood, it's brand new. Obviously, the meat sector began a few years earlier than the seafood sector has. I think as we discussed, the opportunities are enormous in the seafood category. The benefits that we can provide, versus land animals, the sea animals have so many other benefits we can provide without having mercury or microplastics or antibiotics and toxins and so forth. I think probably the best way to kind of characterize some of the challenges we kind of identify them as fourfold. There's a biology part, as Sandhya mentioned, understanding how we can actually get ourselves to grow at the levels that we need to as efficiently and as low cost as possible. There's also the engineering aspect, operations and design of factories that ultimately look like a microbrewery meets a traditional food processing factory. We need to move away as an industry away from calling this lab-made, but into commercial production of cell-based seafood in large scale. So it's not about if it can be done, it's how it can be done. The third is regulatory. So we're obviously in the U.S. dealing with the FDA. The good news is they've been very proactive to embrace this technology as something that's forthcoming. Now we need to, as they've asked us, to meet them early and often so that we can represent exactly what our process is, so they can be assured that the product is safe, and secondly, how the product should be appropriately labeled. And fourth is really marketing, is to really begin to work with marketing partners. And I think it's, as Sandhya mentioned too, it's really important that we have partnerships throughout all these aspects. Certainly, to develop our own sales distribution infrastructure will be quite challenging. So we're quite excited to see how we can partner with industry to ultimately bring these products to market within existing infrastructure. So let's collectively find the best way to get the product to market as fast as possible with as large a volume as possible as well.
So I have good news. Our products are available in the market, and they were better than cost parity from their launch. And that's a rare thing to be able to say in this industry, and I'm proud of the fact that by using whole food commodity ingredients to compete with premium, price volatile, and expensive fish, we are able to undercut them on price, and that's been a real benefit for us. There are two real challenges we have to scaling. One is by using whole vegetables, the supply chain is actually really hard. If we were, and this is not a criticism of anybody, but it could be a lot easier if we were using a traditional protein alternative process and using ingredients that were very consistent, that were produced in consistent factories and were extruded and processed in machinery in that way. We're using tomatoes from fields and eggplants from fields and from greenhouses, and so getting the exact same color and texture and length and taste and everything else every single time is really hard, and it can take months and months and months to figure out what tomato variety is going to grow in this region well, where we open a new factory for another region, what one we need to use for that climate. So that's one challenge. And the other one is just education and awareness. The seafood alternative industry is brand new. And there were a few companies who've been around for a while, but kind of in this 2.0 generation of seafood alternatives, the 4, 5, 6 companies that are really entering the space now have all been around for 2 years or less. Some of them have not launched yet. So it's just a very new space, and just like it took time for consumers to accept that non-dairy milk could taste good, and now that they're accepting that meat alternatives can taste good, seafood's the next frontier, and we're educating every day how to get people to see that.
And in terms of perspective, Maisie, what has your experience been working with these startups and taking on these new initiatives?
Well, as David just said, that most of these companies are less than 2 years old. And there's a big chasm between I have a product that I think tastes good in my facility, and I will say many of those people who think those products taste good haven't tasted the analog product, the old-fashioned one, in quite a while. So your version of what tastes good might be different than what the Red Lobster customer thinks tastes good. I actually have never been to a Red Lobster. I'm just making up what a Red Lobster customer thinks. I'm imagining. And then the business, it seems like everyone's focus, I'm certainly speaking in generalities, but that most of the focus has been on develop a product, develop a product, develop a product. I've got a product, sell it. And there's a huge business that's between I've got a product and it can be in one of our cafes. And there hasn't been the focus on people developing real expertise in distribution, for example. I think distribution is the linchpin to business success in the food business. I mean, first is taste for sure, but second is distribution, and that seems to be mostly a afterthought to people of, oh, now we've got this product, got to get it somewhere. And there's a huge business built around distribution, and if you want to disrupt that, that's another whole thing to take on. So my advice would be to start thinking about distribution of your product from day one, or at least day 2, and talking to the end purchaser, be it a food service company like mine, or a supermarket, or an independent restaurant, are all going to have different distribution networks, different needs for packaging, of course. For me, I'm not going to sell a product in a package. I'm going to sell a product on a plate. So I don't really care what your package says. I don't really care how pretty it is, but I want it to be big, and I want it to be easy to open, right? Very different than if you're going to be on a grocery shelf. So thinking all of those things through are going to be really critical to the business, and most of the startups that we've been dealing with have been really missing that side of the fence.
And what about getting chefs involved in this to get consumers excited? Have you thought much about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, David has a co-founder who's a chef, and I think that's fantastic that you've got that chef's perspective from day one. What we've seen Impossible do with having celebrity chefs really launch the product and create that furor, I think has been fantastic. I have someone on my team, is on the purchasing team, who's dedicated completely to plant-forward innovation, but is a chef, even though they're on the purchasing team. They were a chef with us for over a decade after a long celebrated career as a chef in public restaurants. Because you've got to start, again, with taste, but then also how things perform in a commercial kitchen. And so both on the marketing side and on the development side, I think chefs are critical.
And then this might be more specific for Sandhya, but you seem to be entering the market quite soon for being a relatively nascent company. The R&D in mammalian research tends to be much further along, just based on our scientific and medical studies. Where do you sort of see the R&D in seafood research, in particular to cell-based seafoods?
Very less. That has been a big challenge. So when we first started off thinking about shrimp and crustaceans, there was literally nothing out there. Nobody had ever isolated muscle cells from shrimp. Nobody had ever grown it for, even if they have, they've never grown it for beyond 3 days, and they couldn't keep it in culture. So for us, the last 12 months has been pushing it with all the basic research that we can do, including isolation of the cells, how do you store them, how do you grow them, what temperature, what pressure, what gas, what happens to them if you increase the temperature or decrease it, how do you freeze them, in what do you grow them, how do they taste if you grow them in something different, and so on. I think, like Maisie mentioned, taste it's food. It has to taste right. And it has to taste like the food that consumers have been eating for years and years. So I think that's very crucial for us. So last 12 months has been all about doing basic research. And I think I'm very, very thankful to my team who have all had years of stem cell biology and tissue engineering experience. I think that's very, very important to kind of cross that line of being confident that you can get from an idea to an actual product within 3 years of running the company.
Sandhya hits on one of the sort of other key distinctions about seafood versus land-based is like we have thousands of species, or at least hundreds of species that are being eaten around the world. The US only eats a very, very small fraction of them. But getting the cell lines available so that people can do research, it's kind of almost ridiculous that startups with VC funding are having to do such basic research that should be getting funded by governments. That's a plug if there's any government funders in here, but philanthropically, we're trying to fill the gap, and so we did, fund some work to get a bunch of species and their cell lines immortalized so that they're available to researchers and to startups who only have a few bucks to go test something out and can't do all of the work that Sandhya and her team has been doing. So that's something we're hoping that other funders can jump in and help so that all of the species that we care about that we eat can be addressed. I mean, the market for seafood is freaking enormous. There's just so much that hasn't even been scratched. So if you're an entrepreneur as well, I would definitely, say look at seafood because there's not enough companies. There's a handful of companies and there's hundreds of species. So you've got opportunity.
Yeah, so I've been at a seafood conference the last few days, and yesterday I was presented with the statistics that the seafood industry is over $1 trillion, and just the farm segment's over $250 billion. So this market is really huge. If we're successful, markets predicted that by 2025, we would, as a plant-based seafood industry, be a $3 billion, $3.194 billion industry, which is still pretty incredible considering that the Wall Street Journal said 2 years ago the entire market was 10 million. So if we do actually hit that kind of scale, which is aggressive, we'll still be a drop in the bucket. So the ocean is wide and vast, and we need to tackle it all together.
And putting in another pitch related to species for people to work on, we as the food service industry have had this roundtable with the sustainable seafood advocacy organizations for about 5 years. And the first thing that we said to the advocacy community is, we want to work on these species. tuna, shrimp, salmon, whitefish.
Whitefish.
And they said, whitefish isn't a species. And we said, we know. But from a culinary perspective, whitefish is a species. And I'm using the scientific term incorrectly, intentionally. But what started out as cod became pollock, became tilapia, became pangasius, all without menus changing. It was either called a filet-o-fish or fish and chips or a fish taco or a fish sandwich, and the species has changed as the market availability and pricing of those species have changed. And I think that's a real opportunity for a plant-based version, because nobody goes into a restaurant to order the pangasius, right? No one is tied to pangasius as their favorite food. But they might really like a fish sandwich or a fish taco. And I think that's an opportunity people aren't as emotionally attached to as they are to a hamburger and the pastoral story, which is all BS anyway, but behind it, right?
And just to add to that, I think we began a year and a half ago, and we ran into the same hurdles. This is a white paper. There was no knowledge. All the knowledge in the industry is on the mammal side. Nobody really actually tackled developing cell lines with seafood. So it's a brand new space. Our focus is finfish, so really approaching the many varieties of delicious seafood and demonstrating via platform technology that our methodology, our protocols that we've developed can actually work across a broad array of species. But there's also crustaceans and mollusks and seafood as an ingredient. It might be used in soups and bisques, but as a finished product that might be raw, might be cooked. So not only there's so many species, there's also so much confusion. So I think as a consumer, we go to a restaurant, those who enjoy meat might prefer a ribeye steak. But when it comes to fish that they might choose, it might typically say MP, market price, meaning in a different way. This particular supply is actually quite variable. I'm not sure what I have or what price it is. So ask your server, and that server will actually recommend something that you'll probably say, that sounds pretty good. So there is a fair amount, I think you're experiencing that in the food service chain, there's a fair amount of flexibility amongst consumers against different species. So I think we can really, and there's so much confusion because even language like sea bass has many definitions. So yes, there's a lot of fraud in this industry, but there's also a lot of unintentional understanding, even at the culinary level, about what they're receiving. And sadly, land animals are grown on land. They have tags. We can predict them. Seafood comes out of the oceans in many waters that aren't necessarily properly managed, and there's an awful lot that happens that we don't know about. So it creates so much chaos. So the beauty of what we're doing is we're actually creating for the first time stability, consistency, knowledge about what seafood you're actually consuming. So these are all part of the opportunity for us to how we communicate this to consumer, the many benefits of what we're doing.
I just want to really put an exclamation point on what Maisie said earlier, because I thought I knew a little bit about food, and then you talk to Maisie and you find out you know nothing when you actually find out how these products will eventually get to market, and they represent food service, but we work with other wonderful partners who are helping us understand all the other ways people consume. But if you as a startup haven't thought about those end products and what products are actually on the upswing in the world and what products are on the downswing, like canned tuna is not going up, it's going down. So why would you spend a bunch of your time trying to make like an albacore tuna kind of thing? So we should be really making sure that we're going to where the markets are going to be, and then looking for what are some of the products that we can get to market fastest with. What are the categories where people are willing to experiment a bit more, like in snacking categories versus as, the center of the plate piece of salmon, which you better freaking nail if you're going to get that to be served for $20 at a restaurant. It'd be 40 in the Bay Area. But, so I think it's just really, really important that people talk to people like Maisie and everybody in food service to really understand, like, are you going after the wrong thing from the beginning?
And I do want to just mention that we are taking audience questions. So if you want to submit those or upvote those, we will be taking those in a few minutes. Can you guys speak to the nutritional side of the food here and how you guys see that playing out in cell and plant-based seafood?
In the case of cell-based, it is fish from fish cells. It is nutritionally the same. Under the microscope, it's the same. It is the same. So even long-term, however, there's an opportunity where we can actually optimize the best possible sensory characteristics and nutritional characteristics of seafood, perhaps even contribute greater omegas, or enable this for the food service level to maybe serve a little easier, to maybe survive better in when it's sautéed, for example, or cooked sous vide or some other process. So again, the beauty of what we're doing is versus aquaculture, where we're feeding living fish, we're feeding fish cells with fish feed, also known as media, that we can control. And we're feeding them nutrients and vitamins, amino acids, the same that living fish have, and we're just doing that with fish cells.
So we're a little unique in that we're probably among the cleanest label of all plant protein alternatives. That said, we're not really a protein. We use whole vegetables that are not that high in protein, but they are extremely high in a lot of the micronutrients that we really need in our bodies every day and that we're not getting enough of. And we focus on those. We also do use algae oil in our products to create a serving, an equivalency of amount of 3, 6, 9 omegas in our products to what you'd find in the fish they're replacing. But they have, more importantly, none of the cholesterol, none of the saturated fat, none of the fat, a quarter of the sodium, and no mercury, parabens, or PCBs.
So for an audience question, we have, has CRISPR been used yet to improve any cell lines used in cell-based agriculture?
We haven't used any yet, and we don't intend to use, so we'll see how that goes.
We don't either, and we also don't use any genetic modification.
And then this is an interesting one. Has plant-based seafood been affected by restrictive labeling laws in Arkansas and Missouri? It's quite a high upvote.
I can speak to this one a little bit because I have a policy background and have been looking at this issue quite closely. So thus far, those laws have only been applied to meat or to other words that are similar to meat, like burger and other things like that. However, we are seeing some interest in restricting labeling around seafood. Some senators from, some Congress members and senators from the Northeast, Maine in particular, have been presenting some federal laws, and I'm sure there'll be state examples that will even have a better chance of succeeding, that would attempt to restrict the use of words like fish or specific species. What I actually called for at a seafood conference yesterday was for a voluntary community gathering of seafood and plant-based or cell-based seafood alternative companies to come together and discuss what we actually can use. I'm not going to call my stuff tomato fake tuna stuff. I don't want that word on my label. I'm okay with not saying tuna. I want to say ahimi, frankly, but I need to be able to reference what it's being used as or how it's being experienced, and not just the fact that it comes from tomatoes, because it doesn't taste like tomatoes. At the same time, I'm not looking to deceive anybody. On everything we say vegan and plant-based and no animals, et cetera. So we're certainly not trying to deceive anybody. So I think that coming together as a community with the industry and showing our cards, because there's no deception intended and none being carried out, but also saying you've got to work with us to not quash the competition, to support this growing industry that can enhance what you're doing, is the best way to approach it.
And then, so in terms of scaling up and making this viable for a variety of species and a larger, broader industry, is it the same as what we've been sort of hearing for land-based meats, or is there different hurdles here with seafood?
I would say different and same in different ways. I think the major challenge is that nobody's ever tried to grow stem cells in a 1,000-liter bioreactor, as far as we know. So we don't know how do they grow and what's the resources required for it and what are the conditions required for it. I can't delve too much into the details because of confidentiality, but at least what we have seen, definitely, I mean, with my 13 years of experience working on mammalian cells and 1 year of experience working on fish cells, shrimp cells, is that definitely it's easier. At least for shrimp, it's easy in the sense that it's only muscle and not any other cell or tissue. So we basically have to grow only one type. You don't have to worry about fat or connective tissue or hemoglobin or any of that. Moving on with crab and lobster is what we're going to work on next. There might be a fat component that we have to work towards. But definitely fish cells or shrimp cells, crustacean cells are much easier than land-based. And that's the reason we are very confident in saying that we will be in market in 2 years' time. Yeah.
Sandhya highlighted something that I just want to keep hitting on again, which is so much of the work that is happening behind, like at startups with confidential IP, and it's nothing against you. You guys should be doing that, obviously, with your funding. But like we really, as a community, need to be getting more of this out into the open so that startups can focus on making products and business and not have to do so much of this basic stuff. So we really need to get a lot more people from universities who have sort of similar backgrounds to Sandhya and just get them into this space. So just please help us with that. This goes the same for land, too. This is not just about seafood.
Yeah, and honestly, if we had shrimp cell lines, we would probably be serving us our dumplings today at the Good Food Conference. So. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the way we see it also is there's so much engineering involved too. So as you go to, as Sandhya said, as you go to larger and larger volumes, so we kind of look at this as a 5-phase approach, really increasing volume 10x, 10x, 10x. We finally get to something that's becomes slightly reasonable for large-scale production. So the focus is on large-scale commercialization, how we actually get this accomplished. And each of these stages of growth, there's engineering milestones, there's biology milestones. The cells are undergoing increasing amounts of stress, and then we need to obviously. But there's no shortage of challenges. And as Evan said, I think the more that we can work with industry and strategic partners on engineering, as well as marketing, distribution, we need to minimize our obstacles to getting launched.
There's quite a bit of interest in getting the texture and taste right of cell and plant-based seafood, and they'd like you to speak more to that and how you're approaching that hurdle.
Sure. So we did a prototype of shrimp dumplings a couple of months ago, and we were pretty surprised, but the smell and the taste is inherent. The umami flavor, the seafoodiness of it all, the sweetness of the shrimp that you expect when you put it in your mouth, is inherent. It also has to be enhanced with a little bit of plant extracts that where your animal grows in. For example, shrimp has a lot of flavoring from the algae and the seaweed that it consumes in the ocean. Also, if you're doing a wild-caught shrimp, then you have to take in some of the salinity as well from the oceans. So these are some of the things that we're trying, and we are working with actual dim sum and dumpling chefs who have been eating shrimp all their lives until today, and basically trying to get that taste right. For the texture, it's pretty interesting with crustaceans for sure, is that we aren't ideally looking at scaffolds, because scaffolds are basically layers, but with shrimp, when you take a shrimp outside of its shell, it looks somewhat like a jelly-like substance. So we work more on hydrogels. So just imagine a hydrogel in your ice cube tray, but the mold looks like a shrimp. And then basically, that's exactly where your cells have to grow and form the right connections and then form the muscle tissue. So that's something that we're looking at. So we can look at alginate, which is gel from algae. We can look at chitosan and chitin and a couple of other hydrogels that we're working on. So it's pretty interesting that a lot that has been done on the clean meat side doesn't really suit the clean seafood side. So it's a lot of reinventing the wheels, and that's where I think Evan keeps stressing on the point that we need a lot more research that's being done outside. I honestly don't want to hold IP to a scaffold, like how to make it. What am I going to do with it? I'll probably just buy it from someone if they can make it for us. What I hold IP for is the technology itself. So that's kind of where we are going with.
And on the taste side, on seafood, there's an additional complication, which is that a lot of people don't like fishy fish.
Yeah.
And so where is the level when you're trying to replicate the taste of fish? Take canned tuna, for example. There's a wide range of how fishy canned tuna tastes, right? Between skipjack and albacore and tongal. And what are you trying to hit, and what part of the market? You don't have that so much with the land-based. Nobody said this tastes too chickeny.
I think that's a really important point. Our IP is really about texture, and taste is something that we take a stab at with some basic umami ingredients, algae oil and soy sauce and the such. But one thing I've noticed, and we've actually worked on making our flavor more and more subtle, because our product is actually much more versatile than some of the traditional Asian flavors that we launched them with. So if you look at the salinity or the soy base of our product, it's gone from like 8% of our product to like 4%, and percent, not salinity. That's not our pH or our salinity level, but the amount of flavor we put in is much smaller. But one thing I've noticed across seafood alternatives in restaurants, that, is that there's a really big misunderstanding of how fishy fish is supposed to be. And like, so I'll have some of these carrot locks, and I'll be like, this tastes like somebody just pumped a pound of liquid smoke in my mouth, and smoked salmon isn't that smoky. Or I'll taste something that, you know, is replicating some kind of fish, and I'm like, this tastes like rotten fish. Or like when you have kala namak, the black Indian salt, and you taste it and you're like, that's not eggs, that's rotten eggs. You know, flavors are subtle, especially quality fish. It came from the ocean, hopefully close by, and the fresher it is, the less it smells and the less it tastes. And so when we're working with things like, you know, high-grade tuna for sushi, we don't want it to taste very strong. And when people are like, oh, it doesn't taste much like fish, I'm like, you live in Arkansas, you don't know what fish should taste like.
I think what's important to add is right now, fish is so variable. Again, it's at Atlantic Pacific, wild farm, male, female, old, young. You know, we're as consumers, we're seeing a lot of variability, and we're not necessarily familiar with all the subtle differences. But I think as the panel's all describing, you know, generally speaking, fish is a relatively mild flavor, and is actually used. You know, what's really important is texture. So texture and how the product flakes, and when somebody says, oh, that was a delicious piece of fill in the blank type of fish, they might have said the word delicious, meaning taste, but they might have actually meant the texture or the experience was what they expected. So I think, you know, it's important to understand what is the control, what is conventional fish, what are the volatiles, what are the aroma characteristics, what actually is the texture, how do you describe that? So like any product, as we're doing any kind of food business, understand what exactly you're trying to match. So we're already doing that as well. So we're making medallions of fish now, and we're actually beginning now the sensory part, so we can in fact understand how we can optimize the flavor and in fact have the best possible experience, both taste and texture.
And this is a very popular question as well. As a consumer, what should they be calling this food? So are there some terms you like or don't like? I know it's a bit of a tricky one in the field.
I don't
right
think
now.
we should even step into this
You don't-
one.
yeah.
It's something.
It's a bit of a tricky one right now.
Yeah.
Or do you kind of just brand it as it is, as a product?
You've
maybe?
chosen to pass
Yeah,
that
so
journey.
we chose to create names for our products that intentionally, they were made up words, but they had some component that alluded to the experience they were providing, while also making clear that they were alternatives. So our products all end in the suffix mi, mi, which means the spirit of in Japanese, and then the prefix is like ahi, so ahi mi, or instead of unagi, we call our eel replacement product unami. So we've chosen to do a compound word that's made up, that's trademarkable, and it's an ownable brand, and it doesn't sound weird on a menu, but it also doesn't falsify what it is or make it sound too much like all we're doing is sticking tomatoes on a plate.
I do think, I don't know what the answer is, but as a community, we need to come together and decide what the answer is. We have right now a lot of confusion between just the terms plant-forward and plant-based. Mm-hmm. And we use the definition that Sophie talked about from CIA yesterday of plant-forward, which is a lot of words, but it isn't vegetarian and vegan. It also may include some animal protein. And I just had a customer complain about a product that was a plant-based protein that we had then put a animal product with, right? There was cheese with it, and saying that the plant-forward description was misleading when we're trying to make that distinction. So the more that we could agree and then use the terms in parallel together, we're going to clear up not the legislative problem, but at least the public problem.
It's a big issue for industry and consumers and all stakeholders. I think in the case of Cellbased, I think there's recently announced, as you may have heard, an alliance of cell-based companies in the US that chose to use the word cell-based or cultured as a descriptive word, only because it's a neutral word. It's not necessarily meant to be a consumer-driven word, but just something that the current climate is to really talk to stakeholders, meaning others in the seafood industry, as well as government and regulators and others. So let's not be disparaging to the traditional industry, and let's actually just focus right now on the process. But yes, there's another tier of discussion that we'll have to have about what to call this at the consumer level. But I think we could also learn from Impossible and Beyond that actually use their brand as the adjective for the word burger. So again, that's another hybrid of a fanciful name versus a conventional word with a corporate name or something altogether different.
If I could just make a final comment before I see we're running out of time.
Please do.
I mean, I think there's this concept of shifting baselines that makes us forget the history and makes us think that we have a relatively healthy ocean. I want you to just think about the fact that, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, our oceans were so thick with fish that none of these things would have even been thought about at all. Hundreds of years ago, people arrived in the United States and they said the fish shoals were so thick you could walk from your boat to shore across the backs of the fish. The rivers were filled with salmon. That is the way our oceans are supposed to be, and we have destroyed them over the last hundreds of years, and especially within our lifetimes. We are only focused right now on things that could restore that and return the ocean back to the kind of thing that you're seeing up there. And I hope that the things that we're working on right now could get us on that path, because if you're not on that path, you're just wasting your time.
Thank you, and thank
Amen.
you to our panelists.